Chapter 1: A Quiet Beginning. Section 1: Daniel's Childhood. Daniel Andreas San Diego was born in a small town in California. He grew up in a peaceful neighborhood surrounded by green fields and tall trees. His father was a teacher, and his mother worked at a local store. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Daniel was their only child, and they loved him dearly. As a child, Daniel was quiet and curious. He loved spending time outdoors, exploring the woods behind his house. He would often bring home injured birds or small animals. He found and tried to care for them. His parents noticed his deep love for animals and encouraged him to follow his passion. At school, Daniel was a good student but not very social. He had a small group of friends who shared his love for nature. They would spend hours hiking, fishing, and camping. These experiences made Daniel feel connected to the world around him. One summer, when Daniel was 10, he saw something that changed him forever. He came across a group of kids throwing rocks at a stray dog. The dog was hurt and bleeding, but the kids wouldn't stop. Daniel ran to protect the dog, yelling at the kids to leave it alone. He took the dog home and begged his parents to let him keep it. His parents agreed and named the dog Lucky. From that day on, Daniel's bond with animals grew even stronger. He believed that all creatures deserved kindness and protection, but the memory of those kids hurting Lucky stayed with him, planting the first seeds of anger in his heart. Daniel started to notice how people treated animals poorly, even in his own town. He saw farms where animals were kept in tiny cages and slaughtered. He saw pets abandoned on the streets and animals being used for entertainment. These things made him feel helpless and angry. By the time Daniel was a teenager, his love for animals had turned into a deep passion for protecting them. He read books about famous activists and learned about groups that fought for animal rights. He started attending local meetings and protests with his parents' support. Daniel's parents were proud of his dedication, but worried about how serious he was becoming. "Remember, Daniel," his father would say, "you can fight for what you believe in, but always choose peace." Daniel nodded but didn't fully understand what his father meant. At 18, Daniel left for college to study environmental science. He wanted to learn how to make a real difference in the world. But college was also where Daniel's journey would take a darker turn, one that no one could have predicted. Section 2: His early love for animals and activism. In college, Daniel Andreas San Diego quickly became known for his passion for protecting animals. He joined the campus's environmental club and volunteered at local animal shelters. He spent hours cleaning cages, feeding animals, and comforting those that were scared or hurt. To Daniel, these weren't just volunteer activities, they were his mission. One day, during a lecture on climate change, Daniel learned about the effects of factory farming on the planet. He was shocked to discover how much damage industrial farming caused, not just to animals, but to the environment as well. He began researching companies involved in factory farming, determined to do something about it. Through his research, Daniel came across stories of animal cruelty that deeply disturbed him. Videos of abused chickens, beaten cows, and injured dogs haunted him. He started sharing these stories on social media, helping to raise awareness among his friends and classmates. Daniel's posts caught the attention of a local animal rights group. They invited him to one of their meetings, where he met people who shared his views. For the first time, Daniel felt like he wasn't alone. These people understood his pain and anger. They also introduced him to more radical ideas about activism. At first, Daniel focused on peaceful protests. He attended marches, handed out flyers, and gave speeches about the importance of animal rights. His words were powerful and moved many people. But as time went on, Daniel grew frustrated. He felt that words weren't enough to bring change. One evening, during a group meeting, someone brought up the idea of direct action. They talked about sabotaging businesses that harmed animals. Some members were hesitant, but others supported the idea. Daniel didn't say much during the meeting, but the idea stuck in his mind. As Daniel became more involved in the group, he started noticing their methods were becoming more extreme. They would vandalize properties, spray paint slogans on walls, and stage dramatic protests. Daniel wasn't sure how he felt about these actions, but he didn't stop them either. One of the group's leaders, a man named Marcus, saw potential in Daniel. Marcus was older and had been involved in activism for years. He believed in fighting fire with fire and often pushed for bold, risky actions. Marcus took Daniel under his wing and began mentoring him. Under Marcus's guidance, Daniel's frustration turned into determination. He believed the system was broken and only drastic measures could fix it. He started seeing himself as a soldier in a war to protect the voiceless. He stopped questioning the group's actions and started leading them. By the end of his second year in college, Daniel had fully embraced the idea of direct action. He wasn't just an activist anymore, he was a warrior. Section 3. His college years and activist group ****. In his third year of college, Daniel's life took a sharper turn. His grades began to slip as he spent more time with the activist group. They met late at night in secret locations, discussing the injustices they saw in the world. These meetings felt like a second home to Daniel, a place where he could voice his anger and find others who shared his passion. The group was small but dedicated. They called themselves Guardians of the Earth. Most members were young, like Daniel, and had strong opinions about animal rights and environmental protection. They spent their days researching companies that were involved in unethical practices and their nights planning protests. One night, Marcus, the group's leader, shared a shocking story about a local company accused of animal cruelty. The company, he explained, supplied products for major food chains and was known for keeping animals in terrible conditions. Marcus suggested the group take direct action against them. At first, the group was hesitant. Some members suggested writing letters or organizing a peaceful protest outside the company's headquarters. But Marcus argued that these methods had been tried before and had failed. If we want real change, he said, we need to hit them where it hurts. Daniel listened quietly, torn between his love for animals and his father's advice about choosing peace. But when Marcus described the company's cruel practices in detail, something inside Daniel snapped. He raised his hand and said, I'm in. Let's do it. From that night on, Daniel became one of the most active members of the group. He helped plan their actions, from graffitiing walls to organizing sit-ins at government offices. Each time they struck, Daniel felt a rush of adrenaline and a sense of purpose. He believed they were making a difference. Despite his growing involvement in activism, Daniel's parents had no idea what he was up to. When he visited home, he acted like everything was normal. He didn't want to worry them, and he certainly didn't want them to try to stop him. Daniel's double life wasn't easy. He had to balance his studies, his family, and his growing responsibilities in the group. But the more time he spent with the Guardians of the Earth, the more he felt like this was his true calling. The group's activities began to attract attention. Local newspapers reported on their protests, calling them a radical fringe group. Some articles praised their passion, while others criticized their methods. The mixed reactions only fueled Daniel's determination. By the end of his college years, Daniel had transformed from a quiet, nature-loving boy into a determined activist. He believed he was fighting for a noble cause, even if it meant breaking the law. What he didn't realize was that his journey was about to take a dangerous turn. Section 4. The Turning Point. By the end of his college years, Daniel's involvement with the Guardians of the Earth had grown intense. What started as small protests and peaceful demonstrations had now escalated into more extreme actions. The group was increasingly willing to break the law to make their point. Daniel began to believe that the system could never change unless it was forced to. One evening, Marcus called an urgent meeting. He told the group that they had information about a large pharmaceutical company that was conducting cruel experiments on animals. The company was testing products on rabbits, monkeys, and other creatures in inhumane conditions. Daniel's anger flared when he heard the details. He wanted to take immediate action. At the meeting, Marcus proposed a plan. They would break into the company's facility, free the animals, and destroy any equipment that was used for testing. The plan was risky, and the consequences could be severe. But Marcus promised that the group would be careful. They would wear masks, and they would be quick. Daniel wasn't sure at first. He knew the risks involved breaking into a facility was illegal, and they could get arrested. But he also felt that this was the right thing to do. These animals were suffering, and someone had to help them. If no one else was willing to act, then it was up to him. The night of the operation, Daniel and several members of the group met at a remote location to prepare. They were all nervous, but there was also a sense of excitement. This was going to be their biggest action yet. Daniel had never felt more alive. He was ready to risk everything for what he believed in. The plan was simple. They would break into the facility, release the animals, and destroy any equipment used for testing. Daniel and two others were assigned to disable the security system, while the rest of the group freed the animals. Everything seemed well organized, but as the group approached the facility, they realized just how dangerous the situation was. The security guards patrolled the area, and there were cameras everywhere. Daniel felt his heart race as they snuck past the guards and into the building. The air was thick with tension. They moved quietly through the halls, but the sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty building. When they finally reached the lab where the animals were kept, Daniel couldn't believe his eyes. Dozens of cages lined the walls, each one containing a frightened animal. The sight filled him with both anger and sadness. This was the moment he had been waiting for too. Release these animals and stop the suffering. But as they began to unlock the cages, something went wrong. One of the alarms went off, blaring throughout the building. Panic spread through the group. They tried to finish the task quickly, but the sound of sirens grew louder. Within minutes, the police arrived, and the group was forced to flee. Chapter 2, A Descent into Extremes. Section 1, The Aftermath of the Raid Asterisk. After the failed raid on the pharmaceutical company, Daniel's life took a dramatic turn. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The authorities were searching for the group, and the police were everywhere. His name had been linked to the incident, and the media quickly caught wind of it. They called him a terrorist and an extremist, painting him as a dangerous radical. Daniel went into hiding, constantly moving from place to place, afraid to stay in one location for too long. He couldn't even trust his old friends. They had become distant, scared of being associated with him. His parents tried to reach him, but Daniel refused to call home. He didn't want them to know how deep he had gotten into the underground world of radical activism. During this time, Daniel became more isolated. His once strong belief in peaceful activism had faded, replaced by a burning desire for revenge. He wasn't just fighting for animals anymore, he was fighting for his own survival. The anger inside him grew stronger with every passing day, and the line between right and wrong blurred further. One day, he received a message from Marcus, who had managed to stay out of sight. Marcus told Daniel that the authorities were closing in on them, and they needed to act quickly. He suggested that the group should go underground, abandoning their old ways and using more covert tactics to strike fear into those they believed were responsible for animal cruelty. Daniel, now desperate, agreed. He felt a deep sense of betrayal by the system. He no longer saw himself as an activist. He saw himself as a soldier in a war that had no rules, no boundaries, and no mercy. Section 2, Becoming a Target. Daniel's first mission as part of this more radical approach was to target another company involved in animal testing. But this time, things were different. This wasn't just a protest or a break-in, it was an act of terror. They planned to plant explosives at the company's headquarters. The goal was to cause damage, send a message, and strike fear into those who supported animal cruelty. Daniel was terrified but also determined. He had crossed the line, and he knew there was no turning back. The explosives were carefully hidden, and the group used a series of coded messages to coordinate the attack. The mission was clear: hit the company hard, send a message, and disappear before anyone could catch them. The night of the operation, Daniel's heart raced as he and the others carried out the plan. They planted the explosives near the building's entrance, making sure to avoid casualties but still cause maximum damage. As the clock ticked down, Daniel couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. This was what he had been working for, a bold statement that would make the world notice. But things didn't go as planned. As the group was making their escape, something went wrong. The explosives detonated too early, causing a massive explosion that shook the entire street. Windows shattered and cars were overturned. The blast left a trail of destruction in its wake. Daniel and the others ran as fast as they could, but the police were already on their tail. The group scattered in different directions. Trying to avoid capture, Daniel's heart was pounding, and he felt the weight of his actions sinking in. This wasn't a victory, it was a disaster. Section 3. The search and the turning point. After the explosion, the authorities launched a massive manhunt for the group. Daniel's name was plastered across newspapers, and his face appeared on television. They called him a domestic terrorist, a leader of a radical animal rights group. The government offered a large reward for information leading to his capture. Daniel went further underground. He stopped using his real name, adopting a new identity each time he moved. He learned to live in the shadows, avoiding even the smallest hint of recognition. His former life, the one he had once loved, felt like a distant memory. He couldn't go back, and he didn't want to. But even as he embraced his new life as a fugitive, Daniel's anger continued to eat away at him. He felt betrayed by the world, by the people who turned a blind eye to the suffering of animals. He began to see the government and corporations as the true enemy. They were the ones responsible for the destruction of the planet and the cruelty toward animals. Daniel's actions became more erratic and reckless. He stopped caring about the consequences of his actions. His only focus was on causing harm to those who he believed were responsible for the suffering he had witnessed. Chapter 3. Living in the Shadows Asterisk. Section 1. The hunt intensifies. Daniel's life as a fugitive became a game of survival. The explosion had sent shockwaves through the country, and the authorities were relentless. An even bigger reward for any information leading to his capture. Daniel had been careful to cover his tracks, but the longer he stayed on the run, the more desperate and careless he became. Communication with Marcus was limited to encrypted messages. Trust was now a rare commodity. Daniel couldn't afford to trust anyone. His paranoia grew, and he began to isolate himself from the world. Section 2. A desperate message. One night, Daniel received an encrypted message from Marcus. The message was brief but urgent. The walls are closing in. We need to act now. Focused, but now even he was panicking. They had reached a point of no return. The authorities had traced some of their movements, and the police were getting closer with every passing day. Marcus suggested a plan to disappear completely. He promised that if they moved fast, they could escape the country and start a new life in a different part of the world. It sounded like a lifeline to Daniel. His whole life had been consumed by this cause, but now all he wanted was freedom. Passion he once felt was gone, replaced by fear and exhaustion. The thought of fleeing the country seemed tempting, but at the same time, it felt like admitting defeat. Section 3. A broken decision. In the end, Daniel made the decision to go. He packed up his things and met with Marcus one last time. Unsure if this was the right choice, they would leave the United States and start fresh, away from the law and away from the life they had known. We're everywhere, and even a small mistake could lead to capture. But the thought of freedom pushed Daniel forward. He wanted to believe that leaving the country would bring him peace, to hide. But as the plane took off, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the police chasing him, it was his own conscience. Section 4. The final chapter. Months passed in South America. Daniel and Marcus lived quietly, constantly on the move to avoid being detected. They kept to the shadows, doing everything they could to stay out of sight. But even in the silence of their new life, Daniel's thoughts were never quiet. He had wanted to change the world, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. But now he realized that his actions had only caused more pain and suffering. The people he had hurt, the destruction he had caused, it all weighed heavily on him. One day, while walking through a small town, Daniel was stopped by a local man who recognized him from news reports. The man looked at him with a mix of curiosity and fear, but Daniel didn't run. He stood there, frozen, as the man quietly spoke. "You're Daniel Andreas San Diego, aren't you?" The man asked. Chapter 4. The final years Section 1. An uncertain future Daniel's life in South America had become a routine of uncertainty. He and Marcus moved between small villages and remote areas, always careful not to attract attention. While Daniel tried to put his past behind him, the guilt still gnawed at him. He knew he couldn't run forever. His life had been marked by violence. And even though he had physically left the United States, the scars of his actions remained. For Marcus, things were different. He had a certain calm about him, as if he had accepted his role in the world. He no longer questioned their actions. To him, the revolution had been a means to an end, and now it was over. But for Daniel, the revolution was still alive in his mind. It was the cause that had led him down this dark path. And despite his regrets, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Section 2. The call from the past One day, as Daniel was sitting alone in a small, dimly lit room, he received an unexpected message. It was encrypted, just like the ones from Marcus. At first, he thought it was from his old comrade. But when he decrypted the message, his heart sank. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from someone he never expected to hear from again. The message came from the FBI. The message wasn't a threat or a demand. Instead, it was an offer a deal. The FBI knew Daniel was hiding in South America, but they hadn't been able to find him. The message proposed a new life in exchange for information. If Daniel agreed to help the authorities expose other members of the group he had once been part of, he could have a fresh start. He could leave the criminal life behind, running, and now the possibility of a new life felt too tempting to ignore. Section 3. The decision. Daniel's response to the FBI was swift. He agreed to cooperate, and soon, arrangements were made for his return to the United States. The decision wasn't easy. It meant facing his past, standing in front of the people he had once fought against, and answering for his actions. But after years of running, the thought of freedom was too much to ignore. Section 4. A new beginning. Daniel's return to the United States was quick and discreet. He was placed in a witness protection program, given a new identity, and relocated to a small, quiet town far from the life he had once known. He lived under a different name, in a different world. For the first time in years, Daniel could walk down the street without looking over his shoulder. He could go to a grocery store or sit in a park without feeling like someone was following him. It was a strange feeling, almost surreal. But peace did not come easily. The weight of his past still haunted him, and he struggled to adjust to the quiet life he kept to himself, never allowing himself to form close relationships. He was constantly reminded of the lives he had ruined, the destruction he had caused. Chapter 5. The struggle within Section 1. Adjusting to a new life Life in the witness protection program was not as simple as Daniel had hoped. The quiet town was peaceful, yes, but it was also a constant reminder of his isolation. He lived in a small, modest house with no family or friends to call his own. His days were spent doing mundane tasks, shopping for groceries, walking in the park, and attending community events. But everything he did felt hollow. as if he were just going through the motions of life without truly living it. Daniel tried to fit in. He went to church on Sundays and visited local cafes, but he always kept to himself. The people in town were kind, but they didn't know him. No one knew his past. They only knew the man who lived next door. Someone who kept to himself and avoided eye contact. A man who seemed to carry an invisible burden. As much as Daniel wanted to move on and forget, his past would not let him. He spent his nights staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the choices he had made. The guilt, the shame, the fear, it was all still there, lurking in the corners of his mind. Despite the new life he had been given, Daniel found it hard to escape the shadows of his former self. The weight of his past mistakes pressed on him every day. And though he tried to make a new start, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in the shadow of the man he used to be. Section 2. Flashbacks and regret. One evening, as Daniel sat in his living room, flipping through old photographs, memories from his past came rushing back. He found a picture of himself standing beside Marcus, both of them smiling and holding up their revolutionary banners. It was a simpler time, before everything had fallen apart, before the explosions, the violence, and the endless running. He remembered the first time he had joined the movement. At the time, it had all seemed so noble, so right. They were fighting for justice, for freedom, for the oppressed. But as the years went by, the cause had become something much darker. The faces of those they had hurt, the innocent lives destroyed, haunted him. He had been a part of that. He had played a role in the suffering. Daniel felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he stared at the photo. The man in the picture was not the man he had become. That young, idealistic man had been replaced by someone who carried the weight of countless lives lost. The memories of the people he had hurt, whether directly or indirectly, came flooding back. The faces of those who had died in the attacks. The families who had lost loved ones. How could he ever make up for that? He closed the photo album and put it away, but the memories lingered. His past was like a shadow, always following him, never letting him forget. Section 3. A chance encounter. One afternoon, as Daniel was walking down the street, he ran into a woman who had recently moved to the town. Her name was Clara, and she was a librarian at the local library. Clara was friendly and outgoing, the opposite of Daniel, who preferred to keep to himself. She smiled at him and struck up a conversation. At first, Daniel was cautious. He didn't want to get close to anyone. But there was something about Clara that made him feel comfortable, as if she could see through his defenses. Over the next few weeks, they ran into each other several times, and Daniel found himself looking forward to their conversations. She was kind, and she never asked about his past. She was simply interested in getting to know him as he was now. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he could have a normal life. Maybe he could start over and leave his past behind him. Clara's presence was like a breath of fresh air. She showed him kindness without judgment, and that was something he had never truly experienced before. It was a feeling he had long forgotten. But even as they grew closer, Daniel knew he couldn't let Clara get too close. His past was something that would eventually catch up with him. It always did. He couldn't put her in danger, couldn't allow her to become a part of his broken past. No matter how much he wanted to be close to her, he had to keep his distance. Section 4. The choice to let go. One evening, Clara invited Daniel to join her for a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow across the town. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made Daniel feel like he could forget everything. He agreed to join her despite the inner turmoil he felt. As they walked, Clara talked about her life, her dreams, and her love for books. Daniel listened, but his mind was elsewhere. He was constantly aware of how close they were walking, of how his past could suddenly catch up with him. It felt like there was a wall between them, a barrier that he had built to protect himself and her from the truth of who he was. After a few minutes of silence, Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "Daniel," she said softly, "I can tell something is bothering you. You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know that you don't have to carry whatever it is alone." Daniel's heart clenched. She had no idea what he was carrying. How could he explain it? How could he tell her the truth without destroying the fragile bond they had formed? He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, and for the first time in years, he wanted to let go. But he couldn't. The fear of what would happen if he did kept him silent. Instead, he looked at her and smiled, a sad, distant smile. "I'm just trying to figure things out," he said quietly. "But thank you for everything." Clara smiled back, her eyes full of understanding. But Daniel knew that it was only a matter of time. Chapter 6, Running from the Past. Section 1, The Decision to Leave ****. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that staying in the town was dangerous. The peace he had found with Clara and his new life seemed too fragile. Every day that passed made him feel like he was teetering on the edge of something terrible. His past was a ticking time bomb, and no matter how hard he tried to outrun it, it would eventually explode. One night, as he lay awake in bed, he realized that leaving was the only option. His heart ached at the thought of abandoning the life he had started to build. He had come to care for Clara, and leaving her behind was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. But he knew it was for the best. She deserved someone who wasn't burdened by the mistakes of the past. The next morning, Daniel began making plans. He packed his belongings into a small suitcase, leaving behind the life he had tried to rebuild. It felt like a nightmare. It wasn't just the fear of being caught that drove him to leave. It was the overwhelming guilt. He couldn't face Clara with the truth. He couldn't risk dragging her into the darkness he had lived in for so long. Before he left, Daniel wrote a note for Clara. He told her that he had to go, that there was something he needed to do. He couldn't explain why, but he hoped she would understand. It wasn't fair to her, but it was the only way to keep her safe. After writing the note, he left it on the kitchen table and walked out the door, knowing that he might never return. Section 2, A New Beginning in a Different Town. Daniel's escape led him to a small, remote town in the mountains. It was quiet and secluded, far from the life he had left behind. He found a cheap apartment in a rundown building and settled in, trying to keep a low profile. The people here didn't know him, didn't ask questions. It was exactly what he needed: anonymity. He found a job at a local diner, washing dishes and waiting tables. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to survive. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. The more invisible he was, the safer he felt. Each day was spent doing the same routine: work, eat, sleep. The isolation didn't bother him as much as it used to. It was easier to exist in this new place far away from his past. But no matter how hard Daniel tried, he couldn't escape the constant feeling of dread. The town was peaceful, yes, but he always felt like he was looking over his shoulder. He couldn't stop thinking about the people from his old life, the ones who were still fighting for their cause, the ones who would never stop searching for him. It was only a matter of time before they found him. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel tried to make peace with his situation. He knew he couldn't run forever, but he also knew he couldn't go back to the life he once had. He had to believe that. But deep down, he couldn't escape the fear that one day the past would come knocking. Section 3, The Unexpected Visitor ****. It had been nearly 3 months since Daniel moved to the mountain town. He had settled into his new routine, and life had become bearable. He had stopped constantly looking over his shoulder, though the paranoia still lingered. The guilt, however, had never left. He still thought about Clara, still wondered if she had ever forgiven him for leaving without a word. One afternoon, as he was cleaning the diner after his shift, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Clara. Daniel froze, his heart racing. He couldn't believe his eyes. She shouldn't be here. How had she found him? Had someone told her? He tried to control his breathing, but the panic was overwhelming. He thought about running, but he knew he couldn't escape. It was too late. Clara walked in cautiously, her eyes scanning the diner. When she saw Daniel, her face softened, and she approached him slowly. "Daniel," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I knew you were here. I had to find you." Daniel didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to explain, to apologize for leaving without a trace, but he couldn't. He was ashamed of what he had done. He was afraid that telling her the truth would ruin everything. Clara didn't wait for him to speak. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "I know you're running from something," she said, "but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here for you. Whatever it is, we can face it together." Daniel's heart broke at her words. He had never felt so conflicted. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, but he couldn't let her into his dangerous world. He had to protect her, even if that meant pushing her away. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "You can't be a part of this. You don't know what's at stake. Please, just leave." But Clara shook her head. "No, I'm not leaving. Not this time. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Daniel felt the weight of her words, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for him to start over. But he also knew that the past never really let go. It was always lurking in the shadows, waiting to destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. Section 4, the decision to face the past As Clara stood there holding on to him, Daniel felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. He could keep running, he could keep hiding, but it wouldn't bring him peace. The only way to move forward was to confront the past head-on. Daniel looked at Clara, his eyes filled with both fear and resolve. "I need to tell you everything," he said softly. "You deserve to know the truth." Clara nodded, her face calm but filled with concern. "I'm ready, Daniel. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Daniel felt like he wasn't alone in this. Maybe the road ahead would be hard, and maybe it would mean facing the consequences of his action. Chapter 7, Confronting the Past. Section 1, Daniel's Confession. The following evening, Daniel and Clara sat in his small apartment, the weight of the moment settling heavily between them. Clara had insisted that Daniel tell her everything. There was no more running. Daniel knew that the time had come to face the truth. He couldn't keep living in fear of the past, but he also couldn't bear to lose Clara. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "Clara, I was involved with a group that, well, they did terrible things I'm not proud of." His voice faltered, and he looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Clara listened quietly, her expression serious but compassionate. She didn't interrupt, giving him the space to speak his truth. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to find the right words. He had spent so many years burying the details of his past, hiding from the consequences. But now, as he opened up to Clara, that justified violence and terror. "But after everything I saw, everything I did, I couldn't stay. I had to leave." Clara's face was a mixture of shock and sadness, but she didn't pull away. She simply reached out and placed a hand on his. "Daniel, I had no idea, but I'm glad you left. You're not that person anymore." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I tried to escape, to rebuild my life, but it's never that simple. I've made enemies, people who won't let me go. They're still out there, watching." Clara squeezed his hand. "But you're not alone now. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." For the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of hope. Clara's words were a lifeline. He could still be a better person, even if his past would never fully let go. Section 2, the return of old enemies. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty. Daniel tried to focus on rebuilding his life, but the weight of his past loomed over him like a dark cloud. It wasn't long before his fears became reality. One evening, as he returned to his apartment, he noticed something strange. A note was slipped under the door. He picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The words were chilling. Asterisk, we haven't forgotten you, Daniel. You can't run from your past. You will answer for your crimes. Asterisk. His heart skipped a beat. The group he had once been a part of had found him. They were coming for him, and Clara was in danger now too. He couldn't let her get hurt because of him. Daniel rushed inside and locked the door. Clara had just arrived, and her face was filled with concern when she saw him pacing nervously. "What's wrong?" she asked. He showed her the note, his voice tight with fear. "They found me, Clara. It's only a matter of time before they come here." Clara looked at him, her face determined. "Then we'll go. We'll leave now, before they can hurt you or us." Daniel shook his head. "I can't keep running. This time, I need to face them. I have to put an end to this." Asterisk Section 3. Preparing for the confrontation. Asterisk. The decision had been made. Daniel would confront the people from his past. There was no more hiding, no more running. But before he could face them, he had to be prepared. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. He knew that the group he had once worked with had connections, resources, and no hesitation in using them. Clara insisted on helping. "We'll figure out a plan, Daniel. You can't go in there blind." They spent the next few days preparing. Clara used her network of contacts to gather information, while Daniel took stock of his past, the names, the places, the people he had once trusted. Every memory he had tried to bury now came rushing back. He felt like he was becoming the man he used to be, and the feeling made him sick. But this time, he was doing it for the right reasons. He was doing it for Clara and for himself. They spent hours going over potential safe houses, escape routes, and strategies. But as much as they planned, Daniel knew that the confrontation would be unpredictable. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he couldn't let fear hold him back. The past was never going to let him go. The only way to take back control was to face it head-on. Daniel stood by the window one night, looking out at the dark sky. He could feel the weight of the choices he had made pressing down on him. But for the first time in years, he felt ready. He wasn't the same man he had been, and he wouldn't let the mistakes of his past define his future. Asterisk Section 4. The final confrontation. Asterisk. The day of the confrontation came sooner than Daniel had expected. He and Clara made their way to an old, abandoned warehouse, a place he knew would be a meeting spot for those from his past. The building was dark, the air thick with tension. Clara stayed in the car, watching for any signs of danger, while Daniel entered the warehouse alone. Inside, the shadows seemed to move, and Daniel's heart raced as he walked further in. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of the group. And then, out of the darkness, figures emerged. There were 3 of the mold faces he had once called comrades. "You thought you could run, Daniel," one of them said, stepping forward. His voice was cold, full of contempt. "But there's no escaping the life we chose. You can't hide from what you've done." Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm not hiding anymore. I left that life behind. I'm not part of this anymore." The man laughed darkly. "You don't get to just walk away. You owe us. You owe for the things you've done." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "I can't change the past, but I won't let it control me. I'm done." The tension in the room was unbearable. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. But then, in an instant, the silence was broken by the sound. The group hesitated, seeing her enter. For a moment, Daniel thought they might back down, but the leader spoke again. Asterisk Chapter 9. The final confrontation. Asterisk. Section 1. The unexpected knock. Asterisk. Several months passed in the quiet town. Daniel and Clara had settled into their new life. Their days filled with simple routines, working, walking through the woods, and enjoying each other's company. They felt safe, almost as if the dark days were behind them. But the past had a way of catching up. And that is exactly what happened one cold morning. It started with a knock on the door. Clara opened it cautiously, her heart sinking when she saw a man standing on the doorstep. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, with a serious look on his face. "Is Daniel San Diego here?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Clara's mind raced. She knew that name. It was the name he had used in the past, the name tied to everything he had tried to escape. Before Clara could respond, Daniel appeared in the hallway. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the man. This was no ordinary visitor. This was someone from the past. The man looked at Daniel. "We need to talk. It's not over." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped they would never find him here, but it seemed he was wrong. Section 2. The past comes to light. The man stepped inside, and Daniel motioned for him to sit. Clara stood silently in the background. Her eyes locked on Daniel as she tried to read his expression. This was not a visit they had expected. Section 3. The plan. Over the next few days, Daniel and Agent Thompson worked together, going through files and reports, trying to piece together the group's plan. The more they discovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a small operation, it was an attack on the country itself. The group had infiltrated several key institutions and was planning a coordinated strike that would throw the country into chaos. They had resources, manpower, and a deep network of support. Stopping them wouldn't be easy. Daniel used everything he had learned in his time with the group. He knew their tactics, their communication methods, and their hidden locations. This knowledge gave Agent Thompson and his team the edge they needed to track down the group's leaders. Section 4. The showdown. The day of the operation arrived. Daniel and Agent Thompson, along with a small team of trained agents, gathered at a safe house on the outskirts of town. The final plan was in motion, and everything had been set into place. It was now or never. Daniel felt a deep sense of anxiety building inside him. This was at the moment where he would face the group he had once called family. He had trained with them, fought alongside them, and now he would be fighting against them. As they moved into position, Daniel's thoughts turned to Clara. He knew how much she had sacrificed for him. She had stood by him through the darkest moments of his life, and now she was watching him prepare to face the people who had once been his brothers in arms. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. Section 1. The Aftermath. The dust had settled, and the danger was over. The group that had once terrorized the country was dismantled, its leaders arrested, and its members brought to justice. Daniel stood amidst the aftermath, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had been through. The operation had been a success, but the cost of it all lingered. Though the group's reign of fear had ended, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the battle within himself wasn't quite over. He had done what needed to be done, but the past still haunted him, and the future seemed uncertain. As he walked through the empty streets of the town he had tried so hard to protect, he couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. The life he had left behind had come back to find him, but now it was truly behind him. There was no going back. Section 2. The Choice. Daniel returned home to Clara, his mind heavy with the decision he had to make. They sat together in the quiet of their home, surrounded by the life they had built in the small town. It was a life he had fought for, one he hadn't thought he deserved. Yet, now that it was within his grasp, he wasn't sure what to do next. "Do you think we'll ever really be free from the past?" Clara asked, her voice soft and full of understanding. She had seen the toll the past had taken on him, but she had also seen the man he had become. Section 3. Starting over. Daniel and Clara made a decision to leave the small town. It wasn't that they didn't love their home, but they knew they needed to start fresh. Somewhere far away from the shadows of their past, they moved to a quiet village on the coast, where the ocean met the sky, offering a sense of peace and endless possibility. They started a new life. Daniel found work as a carpenter, using his hands to build something solid and lasting. Clara opened a small bookstore, where they could both enjoy the quiet rhythm of daily life. Though the past was never far from his mind, Daniel had found peace in the present. Every morning, he would wake up beside Clara, grateful for the life they had created together. Every evening. Section 4. A legacy of hope. ****. Years passed, and the couple's life in the village became a testament to the power of second chances. Daniel and Clara never forgot the sacrifices that had brought them to this point, but they knew that the future was theirs to shape. They found fulfillment in helping others, sharing their story with those who needed hope, and always reminding themselves of the importance of starting over, no matter how dark the past had been. One day, as they sat together on the porch of their cottage, watching the waves crash against the shore, Daniel turned to Clara with a thoughtful expression. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "From everything we've been through, we've found a way to build something real." Clara nodded, her eyes soft.